Bitcoin mining is not slowing down either. Failed segue. And basically what we have here is Bitcoin mining startup Blockmetrix raises $43 million in Series B round. Ooh, us home miners are going to have a hard time competing, guys. Trying to catch up on the ASIC side of things is extremely difficult. Even with Intel coming onto the market, it looks like Intel is basically selling directly to mining companies who are then taking those boards and having another manufacturing company like the third party build them out specifically for the mining farms. I'm really trying to decide how I want to approach it. It's just really hard and kind of depressing when you see a lot of this as a home miner or even just a small time miner. Because I know, like, technically I'm pretty much home miner level, just moved out into a warehouse, but definitely not at this level. So Bitcoin mining startup Blockmetrix raises $43 million in Series B round. The company has previously raised $7 million that went into deploying more than 1,000 mining rigs. Dallas-based Bitcoin mining startup Blockmetrix announced a $43 million Series B funding round, bringing a total funding to $50 million since June of 2021. The new monies will allow Blockmetrix to secure more than 5,000 mining rigs to be added to 1,000 miners put to work with last year's $7 million Series A. This latest round was oversubscribed, said the company, and included investors from the US, Australia, and several Asian countries. Blockmetrix plans to grow rapidly by using the maximum amount of available capital and debt to buy mining rigs, while controlling power costs through various joint ventures, CEO and co-founder Nevin Bannister told CoinDesk. Through joint ventures, we will obtain part ownership of a co-location facility to ensure low power rates and place to house our Bitcoin miners, he said. The company, JV Partners, will be responsible for the development and operation of the co-location facility, which will help channel the majority of the funding directly towards increasing hash rates rather than building infrastructure, Bannister explained. So they're basically, assigning out the infrastructure portion of it so that they can just focus on, I assume here at this point, just plopping down miners. Bannister is a professional entrepreneur, having previously founded startups that have sold for combined value of over $800 million, according to the Blockmetrix website. The funding comes at a time when cryptocurrency and broader markets have pulled back from their peaks last year, dampening some of the euphoria among investors. Quote, "Our investors were attracted to our management's proven ability to operate and scale at a high level," end quote, said Bannister. "Our ability to raise a significant amount of funding during market turmoil and geopolitical challenges makes us distinct from other competitors," he added, noting the company's investors consisted mostly of high net worth individuals, many of whom have institutional ties and experience. And we've talked about this. Institutional money, it's good to a certain extent because it means that a less volatile market. It means that maybe we break out of things like the traditional Bitcoin super cycle, but it's also bad from the perspective of the mining or the miners, right? Essentially because as these companies gather up all the resources, they have funds and access to funds that just the regular person does not have access to. And it really hurts if we look at large companies within the GPU mining segment like Hut 8, where, the fact of the matter is once ETH moves to proof of stake, it could be very good for small time miners because large mining companies aren't as attracted to GPU mining. I think there's a positive there, but we still have to worry about all those miners that are on the network and where they're going to go to. We've talked about the downside of a lot of the ASICs moving over, the Ethereum ASICs moving over to Ethereum Classic, but we still on the GPU side have GPU mineable only coins like Flux and Ravencoin, etc. And there was a little bit of hope, right, that with the move to proof of stake for Ethereum, a lot of these large GPU mining facilities would just shut off. And then we would distribute those networks and start building those networks back up from the ground. You have to remember that like there's this weird starting foundation level of Ethereum that is like the home miner, the smaller time miners that helped build Ethereum up from the ground up. And the reason that works so well is because you have a whole bunch of individuals participating within the network, not a couple of large institutional investors that are pretty much powering the entire network. And that's just my 2 cents as far as that goes. Another plus is Blockmetrix US focus, Texas in particular. Quote, experts have declared Texas to be the next Bitcoin mining capital, end quote, and they are going to go head to head once again with the federal government. It seems like at this point, and we'll be talking about that here in a second, but it's interesting that you kind of have these states that are essentially kind of opposed to whatever the federal regulations are surrounding a lot of these. A weird thing, though, is Texas still doesn't have Binance.us. I'm in Texas, so there's a lot of oddities surrounding this entire market right now. I just find it kind of curious that we're going to have the importance of, so the US, to give you guys an idea, basically was kind of founded on like breaking down, they call them like checks and balances to a certain extent, but, and then you have your Bill of Rights, and breaking down, essentially what I'm getting to is breaking down the government structure to where, you know, the federal government's supposed to have less power than the state governments, which has less power than city governments. Everything kind of does their own portion to regulate their own specific area. And this is basically was a way to essentially prevent tyranny, that sort of thing. And when it comes to things like cryptocurrency policies and so on, what we're seeing, unfortunately, is a really big pushback from the federal government. And then, of course, the states that are benefiting from cryptocurrency. And it's going to be states that, for a large part, don't rely on the rest of the union for things like power. I know a lot of people are like down on Texas because of their power grid and the infamous issues they had last year. But you have to keep in mind that part of what that does is kind of set it up to be a sovereign state. If you are dependent on these kind of federal resources or other states' resources, then you're more dependent on them. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, I guess is my point, because it's clear at this point that Texas in general is the #1 place to go for mining cryptocurrency. I mean, there are so many different opportunities, from solar to wind to flare gas to just the incentives that the Texas government gives you and the power companies give you as a Bitcoin miner to actually build here and contribute back to the power grid when needed. There were miners on this last winter storm for the year 2022, which wasn't near as bad as 2021, but they actually made more money shutting off their miners and selling that power essentially back to the grid to keep it stable. So there's a ton of different incentives going on surrounding mining within Texas. And if you have the federal government that's going to come in and be super overbearing on it, it's going to be interesting to see how Texas responds to that, right? And that's just kind of how I'm starting to see it, especially when it starts getting called like the Texas or the Bitcoin mining capital, right? Local legislation encourages continued investment, in digital asset mining operations in the state with the hopes of revitalizing economic growth and bringing jobs to the area. Blockmetrix is currently negotiating a JV deal that will secure a 100 megawatt co-location facility in Texas with expansion potential to 200 megawatts, Bannister told CoinDesk. So essentially what we have is another huge miner, a miner that was smaller that's now blowing up to basically it's going to be a huge miner within North Texas. There's a ton of them up there now at this point. It's just getting absolutely insane as far as all the options, the amount of people that are investing into it. There's smaller companies, like I talked to ProDirect Mining, of course, like you guys saw, they're standing up these facilities, starting to try to get into it. But even at their level, it's like, whoa, like that's small compared to companies like this and so on. So it's getting really, really difficult. There's a lot of points. I know I'm kind of rambling a lot. I'm talking about the whole GPU mineable portion. I'm talking about institutional investing. If you don't follow, I understand. I'm going to try to be as articulate as possible and really build out a couple videos surrounding everything that's going on here, because it can get quite confusing. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Crypto Mining Morning Show every Monday through Friday, 7:45 a.m. Pacific and 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. You can check out more clips here, or if you're interested in checking out the entire live show, you can check that out down here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.